The Korean door. There is a mountain in the southern part of Korea, in the province that was once called Gyeongsang, where the trees grow so thick and so old that even in the middle of the day, the forest floor lies in a kind of permanent twilight. The locals call it Yeousan, Fox Mountain, not because they have ever seen a fox there, but because their grandmothers told them never to go there after dark. And when they asked why, their grandmothers would press their lips together and say nothing at all. That silence was the answer. This story takes place in the autumn of 1742, during the reign of King Yeonjo, a king who would later become famous for a tragedy so terrible that we will speak of it another night. But tonight, we are not in the palace. We are far from the capital, far from politics and power, in a small village nestled at the foot of that mountain, where the rice paddies catch the last gold of the October sun, and the smoke from cooking fires rises thin and straight into the cold evening air. A young man named Shin Byung-ho was walking home. He was 23 years old, a farmer's son, but not a farmer, not yet, not in his own mind. He had spent the last 4 years in the nearby town of Muryong, studying for the Gumiho, the great civil service examination that could, in theory, lift a man from the mud of his birth and set him among the stars of the Joseon court. He had failed the exam twice already. His father wanted him to come home and take over the farm. His mother wanted him to marry the daughter of the tofu maker on the other side of the village. Byung-ho wanted neither of these things. What he wanted, though he could not have put it into words, not clearly, not honestly, was to be someone other than who he was. He wanted a different life, a different name, a different fate. He carried this wanting inside him like a stone in his chest, heavy and smooth, and always there. It was this wanting, perhaps, that made him vulnerable to what happened next. The sun had already dropped below the ridge when he reached the place where the village path crossed the stream that came down from Yeousan. There was a wooden bridge here, old, mossy, just wide enough for an ox cart. And on the far side of the bridge, the path split, left toward the village, right toward the mountain. He was about to turn left when he heard it, singing, not the kind of singing you hear at a village festival, loud, cheerful, rough, with rice wine. This was something else entirely. A woman's voice, high and clear and achingly pure, drifting down from somewhere above him on the mountain. The melody was unfamiliar. It did not belong to any folk song he knew, any work song, any lullaby his mother had ever hummed. It seemed to exist outside of category, outside of time, as if the mountain itself had found a voice and was using it to say something that could only be said in music. Byung-ho stood on the bridge and listened. He should have turned left. Every story he had ever heard, every warning whispered by grandmothers, every cautionary tale told around winter fires, told him to turn left, walk home, close the door, and forget the sound. In the old stories, it was always a sound that began it. A song, a laugh, a woman's voice calling your name from a place where no woman should be. He turned right. The path up the mountain was narrow and steep, switchbacking through ancient pines and maples whose leaves had turned the color of dried blood. The singing grew louder as he climbed, or perhaps not louder, but closer, more intimate, as if the voice were adjusting itself to his presence, singing now not to the mountain, but to him specifically. He climbed for what felt like an hour. The last light drained from the sky. Stars appeared between the branches overhead, cold, white, indifferent. His legs burned. His breath came in short, visible puffs, and still the voice pulled him upward, gentle and relentless, like a silk thread tied around his heart. Then the trees opened, and he saw her. She was sitting on a flat rock beside a small waterfall, barely more than a trickle at this time of year. A thin ribbon of silver sliding over mossy stones into a pool, so dark it reflected nothing. She wore a white giagori and a pale blue chima, and her hair was unbound, falling loose over her shoulders and down her back, impossibly long, impossibly black, like a river of ink pouring from the crown of her head. She stopped singing when she saw him, but she did not seem surprised. She did not stand, did not flinch, did not ask who he was or why he had come. She simply looked at him with eyes that were very dark and very still, and she smiled. It was a beautiful smile, but there was something in it, something he would not be able to name until much later, when naming it no longer mattered. That was not quite right. It was the smile of someone who already knows how the story ends. "You climbed a long way," she said, her voice, speaking now, instead of singing, was lower than he expected, softer. It had a warmth to it that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, from her chest, from her belly, from some furnace burning quietly inside her. "I heard your song," he said. I did not want to stop listening." "No one ever does," she said, and something flickered across her face, too fast to read, gone before he could catch it. Sadness, perhaps, or hunger, or both. She told him her name was Sioyon. She said she lived alone on the mountain, had lived there for a very long time. She did not say how long. When he asked about her family, she said only that they were gone. And the way she said it made him understand that gone did not mean they had moved to another village. She invited him to sit. She poured him tea from a ceramic pot that sat beside the rock, as though she had prepared it before he arrived, as though she had known he was coming. The tea was warm, which should have been impossible. There was no fire, no brazier, no source of heat anywhere nearby. Just the cold mountain air and the sound of water falling into darkness. He drank it anyway. The tea tasted like nothing he had ever encountered, sweet but not like honey, floral but not like any flower he could name. It spread through his body like sunlight through paper, warm, diffuse, golden. His exhaustion melted, the stone in his chest, that heavy, constant wanting seemed to dissolve, just for a moment, just for the length of a breath. He felt, for the first time in years, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They talked through the night. He told her about his failures, his ambitions, his aching sense that he had been born into the wrong life. She listened with an attention so complete, so absolute, that it felt almost physical, as though her listening were a hand pressed gently against his chest. Holding his heart steady, she told him stories, too. Old stories, older than Joseon, older than Goryeo, older than any dynasty he had studied. Stories about foxes who lived in the mountains before humans came. Stories about a time when the boundary between animal and human was thinner than a sheet of hanji, and creatures crossed back and forth like travelers between villages. She spoke of these things not as legends, but as memories, and her dark eyes grew distant and soft, as though she were looking at something very far away and very long ago. At some point, he could not say when, he noticed something strange. The moon had risen full and white, and its light fell across the clearing in pale silver sheets. Sioyon sat with her back to the waterfall, and the moonlight illuminated her face, her hands, the white fabric of her jiagori, but behind her, on the flat surface of the rock where her shadow should have been, there was nothing. No shadow. The moonlight passed through the space where her shadow should have fallen and landed, unbroken, on the stone. Byung-ho blinked. He looked again. He told himself it was a trick of the light, an angle, a confusion of tired eyes. But the moon was directly above them now, and his own shadow was crisp and dark beneath him, and hers was not there. A cold feeling crept up from the base of his spine. Not fear, exactly. Something quieter than fear. Something older. The feeling you get when you are standing in a familiar room and suddenly realize that the furniture has been moved just slightly, just enough that everything looks the same, but nothing feels right. He looked at her face. She was watching him. She had seen him look, and her expression had not changed. That same gentle, knowing smile, but her eyes in the moonlight had a faint amber glow. Not a reflection, not the moon caught in her pupils. A light that came from inside, from behind the darkness of her irises, like embers buried under ash. "You see it," she said quietly. Not a question. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Most people do not see it," she continued. "Most people do not want to see it. The tea helps with that. It softens the edges, blurs the things that should not be seen. But you have been looking for something all your life, Byung-ho, and people who are always looking, eventually they see." The waterfall behind her seemed louder now. Or perhaps everything else had gone silent. The insects, the wind, the rustling of leaves, leaving only the water and her voice. "What are you?" he whispered. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached up and pulled her hair over one shoulder, that impossibly long, impossibly black hair. And as she did, the hem of her chima shifted, and he saw, just for a moment, something moving beneath the fabric behind her. Not one thing, several things, moving independently slowly, like fingers flexing under a blanket. Tails. He counted them without meaning to. The way you count stairs in the dark, automatically, helplessly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. Tails, white tipped and silver in the moonlight, emerging from beneath her skirt and spreading across the rock behind her like the petals of a flower or the legs of a spider. I have been on this mountain for 900 years, she said. Her voice had not changed. It was still soft, still warm, still the voice of a woman pouring tea for a guest. I have 100 years left. 100 years, and then, if I have done what must be done, I will become what I have always wanted to be. She looked at him, and the amber light in her eyes was brighter now, steady and unblinking. I will become human. The wind moved through the pines. The waterfall whispered, and Byung-ho sat perfectly still on a rock on a mountain in the dark, looking at a creature that was older than the dynasty he lived in, and he felt beneath the terror, beneath the awe, beneath the desperate screaming of every instinct telling him to run, that wanting, that familiar, heavy, aching wanting. She wanted to be something she was not, just like him. He did not run. This is, perhaps, the strangest part of the story. In most Gumiho tales, the man runs. The man discovers the truth, and the spell breaks, and he flees down the mountain and never looks back. But Byung-ho stayed. He stayed because he recognized something in her eyes that he had seen every day in his own reflection. A loneliness so deep it had become a kind of gravity, pulling everything inward, letting nothing escape. He stayed that night, and the next night, and the next. What happened over the following weeks exists in the story only as fragments, pieces of a letter torn up and scattered by the wind. The village below noticed his absence. His mother wept, his father cursed. The tofu maker's daughter married someone else. Seasons do not wait for men who have wandered off mountains they should never have climbed. When Byung-ho finally returned to the village, 3 months later, in the dead of winter, walking barefoot through snow, he was not the same person. He was thinner. His eyes had a strange, distant quality, as though they were focused on something no one else could see. He spoke very little. He ate almost nothing, and there was a mark on his chest, just above his heart, a small, round bruise or burn the size of a coin. The village doctor could not identify it. It did not heal. It did not hurt. It simply remained like a seal pressed into wax. He died the following spring, quietly in his sleep, on a night when the foxes on the mountain were unusually loud. He was 24 years old. The village women who prepared his body for burial noticed two things. First, the mark on his chest had changed. It was now the shape of a small, perfect fox, as though someone had painted it there with the finest brush. Second, he was smiling, not the grimace that sometimes appears on the faces of the dead, but a genuine, peaceful smile, the smile of someone who has found, at last, the thing they were looking for. They buried him at the foot of Yousan, and for years afterward, decades, some say travelers on that mountain path would sometimes hear singing. A woman's voice, high and clear, drifting down through the pines. And if they were wise, they would turn left at the bridge and walk home and close their doors. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, a traveler would hear that voice and feel something stir inside them. A recognition, a wanting, and they would turn right and begin to climb. No one knows what they found at the top. No one who climbed ever came back quite the same. This is the Gumiho, the nine-tailed fox of Korea. She is not simply a monster. She is not simply a woman. She is something far more complicated and far more sad. A creature suspended between two worlds, belonging to neither, wanting desperately to cross a bridge that may not exist. And tonight, we are going to follow her. Not just through Korean legend, but across the sea to Japan, where the fox is worshipped as a god, and to China, where the fox is a seductress in an emperor's court. 3 countries, 3 foxes, 3 very different answers to the same question. What happens when something that is not human wants to become one? But we will begin where we should begin. In Korea, in the oldest records, in the first whisper of the fox in the mountains. Let us go back. The Korean ROOTS, the earliest mention of a fox spirit in Korean tradition, does not come from a storybook. It comes from a history. The Samguk Sagi, the historical records of the 3 kingdoms, compiled in 1145 by a scholar named Kim Busick. This was a serious work, written by a serious man, intended to record the factual history of Korea's ancient kingdoms, and yet, tucked between accounts of wars and treaties and the deaths of kings, there are foxes. In the year 35 AD, according to the Samguk Sagi, a white fox appeared in the palace of King Demusin of Goguryeo. It sat in the courtyard in broad daylight, staring at the king's chambers, and would not move. The court officials did not treat this as a curiosity. They treated it as an omen, a sign that something was about to change, that the boundary between the natural world and something else had been disturbed. And indeed, within that year, political upheaval swept through the court. The fox in ancient Korea was not yet a beautiful woman. It was not yet a lover or a predator or a tragic figure yearning for humanity. It was, first and foremost, a messenger, a creature that appeared at the edges of human spaces to announce that the world was about to shift. Foxes were liminal beings. They lived on the boundary between the forest and the village, between the wild and the tame, between what could be explained and what could not. To see a fox was to see the membrane between worlds stretched thin, but somewhere in the long, slow centuries between Goguryeo and Joseon, the fox changed. Or perhaps the stories about the fox changed, which amounts to the same thing. By the time of the Goryeo dynasty, roughly the 10th to 14th centuries, the fox had acquired several new characteristics that would come to define the Gumiho as we know it. The first was age. A fox, the stories said, that lived for 100 years could begin to take on human form. A fox that lived for 1,000 years would grow 9 tails and gain the power to transform completely, to become, in every visible way, an impossibly beautiful woman. The transformation was so perfect that no human eye could detect the deception. Almost no human eye. There were always tells if you knew where to look. A reflection in water that showed a fox instead of a woman. A shadow that moved wrong. A fear of dogs whose senses could pierce the illusion. The second new characteristic was hunger. The Gumiho, the stories now said, needed something from humans. In the earliest versions, it was not always clear what this something was. Some stories said the Gumiho fed on human energy, on the vital force that the Chinese called qi and the Koreans called gi, the breath of life itself. She would draw close to a man, share his bed, share his warmth, and slowly, night by night, drain him. He would grow pale. He would grow thin. He would lose interest in food, in work, in everything except her. And then, one morning, he simply would not wake up. Later versions were more specific and more gruesome. The Gumiho, they said, ate livers. Specifically, she needed to consume the livers of 100 men to complete her transformation into a human being. Each liver brought her one step closer. 99 were not enough. The 100th liver, the final one, would close the circle and make the transformation permanent. Why livers? The answer lies in traditional Korean medicine, which held that the liver was the seat of the soul's vitality. It was the organ that stored blood, regulated emotion, and housed a person's fundamental essence. To eat a man's liver was not merely to kill him. It was to consume his identity, his life force, his humanness. The Gumiho was not just feeding. She was collecting, harvesting, assembling piece by piece the raw material of humanity that she did not possess on her own. There is something deeply unsettling about this image, and something deeply sad. A creature so desperate to become human that she must literally consume humans to do it. The very thing she wants to become, she must destroy in order to achieve. This paradox, this terrible circular trap, is at the heart of the Gumiho legend, and it is what separates her from nearly every other shape-shifting creature in world mythology. The Samguk Yusa, a different historical text compiled around 1281 by the Buddhist monk Uryun, contains what many scholars consider the first fully formed Gumiho narrative. Unlike the Samguk Sagi, the Samguk Yusa was less concerned with political history and more interested in the strange, the miraculous, and the unexplained. It is a book of wonders, and the Gumiho fits perfectly within its pages. In one account, a fox takes the form of a beautiful woman and enters the court of a Silla king, seducing officials and sowing chaos. The fox is eventually discovered, not through any great act of heroism, but through a small, quiet mistake, a detail that did not add up. A gesture that was too perfect, too rehearsed, as though the fox had studied human behavior with extraordinary care, but had missed something essential about what it means to be human. Some tiny, unconscious thing that cannot be learned, only lived. This is a theme that echoes through centuries of Gumiho stories. The fox can copy everything about being human, except the one thing that matters. She can mimic speech, laughter, tears, love, but there is always a hollow place inside her performance, a silence where a heartbeat should be. And it is this hollowness, not her claws, not her teeth, not her 9 tails, that makes her truly frightening. By the Joseon dynasty, the Gumiho had crystallized into the figure that most Koreans would recognize today. She was almost always female. She was always beautiful, devastatingly, dangerously beautiful. The kind of beauty that made men forget their families, their duties, their names. She appeared at the edges of civilization, on mountain paths, in forest clearings, near streams and waterfalls, places where the human world thinned and the wild world pressed close. She was solitary, she was patient, and she was, above all else, lonely. This loneliness is the key to the Korean Gumiho. It is what makes her different from her counterparts in Japan and China, as we will soon discover. In Korean tradition, the Gumiho is not merely a predator wearing a woman's face. She is a being caught in an impossible situation, cursed with consciousness, cursed with desire, cursed with the ability to see and understand and want human connection without ever truly being able to have it. She is close enough to human to feel the full weight of her own otherness. And that weight is what drives her to do terrible things. The Joseon scholars had a word for this kind of suffering. They called it Han, a concept so central to Korean identity that it has no true equivalent in English. Han is grief that has been swallowed and held so long that it has become a permanent part of the body, like a bone or an organ. It is sorrow that has outlived its cause and become self-sustaining, a wound that feeds on itself. To say that the Gumiho carries Han is to say that her sadness is not a feeling. It is a condition, a state of being. She is not sad about something. She is sadness itself, given teeth and fur and 9 white-tipped tails. This brings us to perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Gumiho legend, the Yougusyeol, the fox marble. In many Korean Gumiho stories, the fox possesses a small, luminous bead, sometimes described as a pearl, sometimes as a marble of light, sometimes as a tiny moon that she keeps inside her mouth. This is the Yougusyeol, and its function varies from story to story. In some versions, it is the source of the Gumiho's power, the engine of her transformation, the thing that allows her to hold her human shape. In others, it is a kind of currency, something she can pass to a human through a kiss, transferring supernatural knowledge or power along with it. In still others, it is her heart, her literal physical heart, externalized and vulnerable, the one thing that, if taken from her, would unravel everything she has built over centuries. The image of a creature carrying its own heart in its mouth, offering it with every kiss to someone who might crush it, is almost unbearably poignant. And it is pure Korean. You will not find the fox marble in Japanese Kitsune legends or Chinese Huli Jing tales, at least not in the same form or with the same emotional weight. It belongs to Korea, and it speaks to something deep in the Korean understanding of love. That to love is to make yourself vulnerable. That to offer your heart is to risk its destruction, and that some beings will take that risk anyway, again and again, across centuries. Because the alternative, keeping the marble safe inside your mouth, never offering it, never risking it, is a loneliness worse than death. The Gumiho story, then, is not really a monster story. It is a love story, a failed love story told over and over in village after village, century after century, each telling slightly different, each ending the same way, with the fox alone on the mountain, the man dead or gone or forgetful, and the marble still glowing faintly in the dark, waiting to be offered again. But Korea is not the only country that tells stories about foxes who become women and women who might be foxes. Across the sea, in the islands of Japan, there is another fox, older in some ways, stranger in others, who wears a very different mask. Let us go to Japan now. Let us meet the Kitsune. The Japanese mirror. There is a shrine in the city of Kyoto, one of thousands in that ancient capital. But this one is different. It is called Fushimi Inari Taisha, and it is dedicated to Inari, the god of rice, fertility, and prosperity. You may have seen photographs of it, even if you have never been to Japan. 10,000 vermilion torii, gates marching up the side of a mountain in an endless corridor of red, like a tunnel made of sunset. At the entrance to this shrine, on either side of the main gate, there are statues, not of lions or dragons or warriors, as you might expect. The statues are foxes. They sit upright, dignified, their stone tails curling elegantly behind them. Some hold keys in their mouths, the keys to the rice granary, symbolizing abundance. Some hold jewels, some hold scrolls. Their eyes are calm. Their posture is one of quiet authority. They are not guarding the shrine from evil. They are the shrine. This is the first thing you need to understand about the Japanese. Fox, she is sacred. In Japan, the kitsune is not a monster lurking on a mountain path, waiting to steal your liver. She is a messenger of the gods, specifically a messenger of Inari, one of the most widely worshipped deities in the Shinto pantheon. There are more than 30,000 Inari shrines in Japan, and at every single one of them, the fox stands watch. The difference between Korea and Japan when it comes to the fox is so stark that it almost seems like a mistake. The same creature, vulpine, shape-shifting, supernaturally intelligent, capable of taking human form, is feared and hunted in one country and worshipped and honored in the other. How is this possible? How can the same animal, separated by a narrow stretch of sea, carry such opposite meanings? The answer lies in rice. Japan, historically, was a rice civilization. Rice was not just food, it was currency, status, identity, survival. The rice harvest determined whether a village lived or died, whether a lord kept his power or lost it, whether children grew strong or starved. And rice, as any farmer knows, has enemies. Rats, mice, the small, gnawing creatures that slip into granaries at night and eat the difference between life and death. Foxes eat rats. It is that simple and that profound. In Japan, the fox was the farmer's ally, the silent, swift predator that kept the granaries safe and the harvests intact. Over centuries, this practical relationship became spiritual. The fox was elevated from useful animal to divine servant, from rat catcher to messenger of Inari, from creature of the fields to creature of the sacred. By the time Japanese fox mythology fully crystallized, the Kitsune had become something Korea's Gumiho never was: holy. But holiness in Japanese mythology does not mean simplicity. The Kitsune is not merely a benevolent spirit wagging its tail at the shrine door. Japanese fox lore is vast, intricate, and deeply ambivalent. A maze of stories in which the fox can be savior or destroyer, faithful wife, or merciless trickster, depending on the tale and the teller. Let us enter that maze with a story. In the 10th century, during the Heian period, Japan's golden age of art, poetry, and courtly intrigue, there lived a man named Abe no Yasunaga. He was a minor nobleman, unremarkable in most ways, living in the province of Setsu, in a modest estate surrounded by rice paddies and bamboo groves. He was unmarried, which at his age was unusual and faintly embarrassing. His mother worried. His servants whispered. One evening in late autumn, the Japanese call this season Eki, and in the Heian period, it was considered the most beautiful and melancholy time of the year. Yasunaga was walking home along a path that ran beside a river. The sun was setting, and the water was the color of copper, and the maples along the bank were dropping their leaves one by one into the current, where they floated like tiny boats carrying no one. He saw the woman standing at the edge of the water. She was extraordinarily beautiful, pale-skinned, with hair that fell past her waist in a straight black curtain, wearing a layered kimono of white and palest gold. She stood very still, watching the leaves on the water, and there was something about her stillness that was not quite human. It was too complete, too composed, like a painting of a woman rather than a woman herself. Yasunaga approached her. He asked if she was lost. She turned to him, and her eyes were dark and calm and fathomless, and she said, "I have been waiting for someone kind." They spoke. He learned that her name was Kuzunoha, leaf of the kudzu vine, and that she had no family, no home, no place in the world. He offered her shelter. She accepted. Within a month, they were married. For 5 years, Kuzunoha was the perfect wife. she managed the household with quiet efficiency. She bore Yasunaga a son, a boy they named Seimei. She was gentle with the servants, patient with the neighbors, devoted to her husband. She seemed to anticipate his needs before he expressed them, appearing with tea before he was thirsty, laying out his robes before he reached for them. The house, under her care, became a place of warmth and order and subtle beauty. Flowers arranged just so, incense burning at exactly the right moments, meals prepared with an artistry that bordered on the supernatural because it was supernatural. The truth revealed itself, as it always does, through a small crack in the performance. One afternoon, Kuzunoha was in the garden, and her young son Seimei was playing nearby. She was tending to the chrysanthemums, bending low, her back to the house, her attention fully absorbed. When Seimei looked up from his game and saw something that his mother had not intended him to see. A tail, a single white-furred tail, protruding from beneath the hem of her kimono, swaying gently as she worked among the flowers. It was there for only a moment, a lapse in concentration, a slip in the illusion that she had maintained flawlessly for 5 years. But the boy saw it. And though he was only 5 years old, he understood with the terrible clarity that children sometimes possess that his mother was not what she appeared to be. He said nothing, but Kuzunoha felt his gaze. She turned. She saw his face, the confusion, the beginning of fear, and she knew that the life she had built was over. That night, after the household was asleep, Kuzunoha wrote a poem on a folding screen beside the bed where her husband and son lay sleeping. The poem read, "If you love me, come find me in the deep forest of Shinoda, where the leaves whisper my true name." By morning, she was gone. In her place, in the garden where she had tended the chrysanthemums, there were fox tracks in the dew leading away from the house toward the forest, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. Yasunaga searched for her. He took his son to the forest of Shinoda, and there, among the ancient trees, they found a fox. A beautiful white fox with intelligent, sorrowful eyes, sitting at the base of an enormous cedar tree, watching them. Seimei, the boy, walked toward the fox without fear. And the fox, Kuzunoha, his mother, pressed her nose against his forehead. Gently, the way a human mother might press a kiss. Then she turned and vanished into the forest and was never seen again. The boy, Abe no Seimei, grew up to become the most famous onmyoji in Japanese history. A court magician, astrologer, and diviner whose powers, the legends say, came from his fox mother's blood. His story is still told in Japan today, in manga, anime, films, and video games. He is celebrated. His mother is mourned. And at the Abe no Seimei shrine in Kyoto, visitors still come to pay respects to the fox woman who loved a human family so much that she left them rather than let them discover what she was. Now, hold this story in your mind and place it beside the story of Byung-ho and Seo-yeon from Chapter 1. Do you feel the difference? In the Korean story, the Gumiho is a figure of danger and tragic hunger. She draws the man in, drains him, and he dies. Her love, if it is love, is inseparable from consumption. She cannot love without destroying. She cannot be close without feeding. The story ends with a dead man and a fox alone on a mountain. In the Japanese story, the Kitsune is a figure of devotion and tragic sacrifice. She builds a home, raises a child, loves faithfully for 5 years. And when she is discovered, she does not attack, does not feed, does not harm. She writes a poem. She leaves. She chooses exile over exposure, solitude over the destruction of the family she created. The Korean fox takes. The Japanese fox gives. This is not a judgment. It is an observation. And it points to something deeper about how these two cultures understand the same fundamental fear. The fear that the person you love is not who they appear to be. In Korea, this fear leads to tragedy. The mask comes off, and behind it is hunger. The beautiful woman is a predator, and the man who trusted her is consumed. This reflects something about the Joseon worldview, a society built on rigid hierarchies and strict social codes, where appearances were everything, and the wrong identity in the wrong place could be catastrophic. The Gumiho is the nightmare of misplaced trust in a world where trust was the only currency that mattered. In Japan, the same fear leads to melancholy. The mask comes off, and behind it is love. The beautiful woman is a fox, yes, but a fox who gave everything she had to be a good wife and mother. tragedy is not that she was a monster. The tragedy is that the world could not accept her as she was. This reflects something about the high-end Japanese sensibility, a culture obsessed with mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the beauty of things that are destined to fade. But let us not draw our conclusions yet. There is a third fox waiting for us, older, more dangerous, and far more ambitious than either the Gumiho or the Kitsune. She is in China, and she does not want to become human. She wants to become an empress, the Chinese mirror in the 12th century before Christ, nearly 3,000 years ago, when Korea's first kingdom had not yet been born, and Japan's islands were still populated by scattered tribes who left no written record. There was an empire in China called the Shang Dynasty. It was one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, a kingdom of bronze and oracle bones, of vast armies and elaborate rituals, of kings who believed they could speak to their ancestors through fire and cracked turtle shells. The last king of the Shang was named Daixin. He was, by most accounts, a remarkable man, tall, physically powerful, said to be intelligent enough to win any argument, and strong enough to kill a wild beast with his bare hands. He had every quality a king should possess, every quality except one. He could not resist a beautiful woman. Her name was Daji. She arrived at the court as a concubine, a prize of war, taken from the conquered Sioux clan. She was young, breathtakingly beautiful, and possessed of a charm so potent that within weeks of her arrival, the king could think of nothing else. He abandoned his duties. He ignored his advisors. He dismissed generals who questioned him and promoted sycophants who praised his new obsession. The court, which had functioned with ruthless efficiency for generations, began to rot from the center outward, like a fruit left too long in the sun. But Daji's influence went beyond mere distraction. According to the legends, and here the line between history and mythology dissolves like ink in water, she began to suggest entertainments, new ways for the king to amuse himself, and these entertainments grew darker with each passing season. She designed a device called the Paolo, a bronze pillar, hollow inside, set over a pit of burning coals. Prisoners were forced to walk across the pillar while it heated beneath their feet. When they lost their balance, and they always lost their balance, they fell into the fire below. Daji, the stories say, watched these executions from a silk cushion in the viewing gallery, and she laughed. A high, clear, tinkling laugh that sounded, to those who heard it, almost like the barking of a fox. She commissioned a garden filled with pools of wine and forests of hanging meat, where the king's favorites would wander naked in drug-fueled revelries that lasted for days. She ordered the construction of a tower so tall that it could be seen from every corner of the capital, a monument to excess, built on the backs of conscripted laborers who died by the thousands. And through it all, Dai Xin did whatever she asked. He could not refuse her. He could not see through her. He was, in every way that mattered, no longer the ruler of the Shang dynasty. She was, when the dynasty finally fell, overthrown by King Wu of Zhou. In a revolution, chaos, she did not merely break rules. She dissolved the structure that made rules possible. Daji did not just corrupt a king. She corrupted the concept of kingship itself, proving that even the Son of Heaven could be reduced to a puppet by the right pair of eyes. The Chinese fox is a political nightmare, a story about what happens when the center cannot hold. Japan's Kitsune grew in a very different cultural garden, one nourished by Shinto animism, where spirits inhabited every tree, every rock, every drop of water, and the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was not a wall, but a membrane. In this world, a fox becoming a woman was not an act of deception. It was an act of transformation, as natural as a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. The Japanese fox could be dangerous. Certainly, there are Kitsune stories of possession, madness, and ruin. But the dominant emotional note of Japanese fox literature is not fear. It is sadness. The sadness of a fox who loved too much, stayed too long, and had to leave before she was ready. And Korea's Gumiho grew in the space between these two traditions, influenced by Chinese Confucianism, touched by Japanese proximity, but shaped most deeply by something uniquely Korean, something we have already named: Han. That untranslatable grief, that sorrow that has hardened into a permanent state of being. The Gumiho carries and the way the earth carries groundwater, invisibly, heavily, everywhere. She is not a political allegory like the Chinese fox. She is not a romantic tragedy like the Japanese fox. She is an existential tragedy, a being who wants to be something she is not, who will destroy herself and others in the pursuit of an identity that may be fundamentally impossible. There is one more difference worth noting, and it is perhaps the most revealing of all. In China, the fox is defeated by wisdom. Jiangziya sees through the illusion with a mirror and superior spiritual power. The message: the fox can be beaten if you are smart enough, powerful enough, righteous enough. In Japan, the fox is defeated by love. Kuzunoha leaves not because she is exposed by an enemy, but because she is seen by her own child, and she loves that child too much to let him grow up living a lie. The message: the fox is not really defeated at all. She chooses to lose. In Korea, the fox is defeated by nothing. In most Gumiho stories, there is no clear victory. The man dies or escapes with his life, but not his health, and the Gumiho remains on her mountain, 9 tails swaying in the moonlight, waiting for the next traveler. She is not vanquished. She is not redeemed. She simply continues, unchanged, unhuman, still wanting. The message: some hungers cannot be satisfied. Some bridges cannot be crossed. Some things, no matter how desperately they are desired, remain forever out of reach, and that may be the most Korean idea of all. Let us sit with these 3 foxes a moment longer. Let us look at them not as monsters or myths, but as mirrors, each one reflecting the culture that created it back at itself. The Chinese fox asks, what happens when power is given to someone who should not have it? The Japanese fox asks, what happens when love is not enough to bridge the gap between 2 different kinds of being? The Korean fox asks, what happens when you spend 1,000 years becoming something, and at the end of those 1,000 years, you are still not there? These are not the same question, and they do not have the same answer, but they all begin in the same place, with a fox sitting on a hillside, watching the humans below and wondering what it would feel like. The deeper question why foxes, of all the animals in the world, of all the creatures that share the forests and fields and mountains with human beings? Why did three of the oldest civilizations on Earth independently choose the fox as the shape of their deepest anxieties about identity, desire, and deception? The answer is not arbitrary. It is written in the fox's body. Watch a fox move, not in a zoo, not in a photograph, but in the wild, at the edge of a field at dusk, or along a riverbank in the early morning. Watch how it walks. There is something about a fox's movement that is unlike any other animal. It is fluid, precise, and eerily deliberate. Each paw placed exactly where it needs to be. Each step calculated with an intelligence that seems, from the outside, almost human. A dog moves with joyful chaos. A cat moves with indifferent grace. But a fox moves with intention, with what can only be described as awareness. It watches. It calculates. It seems to know that it is being observed, and it adjusts its behavior accordingly. This quality, this uncanny intelligence, this sense that the fox is always performing, always aware of its audience, is what made it, across cultures, the perfect vessel for stories about deception. The fox does not charge like a bear or strike like a snake. It outthinks. It outweights. It adapts. And in a world where survival depended on reading the intentions of others, on knowing who was a friend and who was a predator behind a friendly mask, the fox became the embodiment of a universal human fear, the fear that appearances cannot be trusted. But the fox myth in East Asia goes deeper than simple deception. It goes all the way down to the question of what it means to be human at all. In the Confucian worldview that shaped all three countries, Korea, China, and Japan, each in different ways and to different degrees, humanity was not simply a biological category. It was a moral one. To be human was to follow the way, to fulfill your obligations to your parents, your ruler, your ancestors, your community. A person who failed in these obligations was described in Confucian texts as having lost their human heart. They had become, metaphorically, an animal. The fox spirit inverts this idea in the most disturbing way possible. Here is a creature that has no human heart, that is, biologically and spiritually, an animal. But that mimics the external forms of humanity so perfectly that it can fool even those who are closest to it. The fox spirit looks human, speaks like a human, loves like a human. But inside, where the human heart should be, there is something else, something alien, something hungry, something that wears humanness like a beautiful robe over a body that does not belong in it. This is why the fox myth resonated so powerfully in Confucian societies. It was not just a ghost story. It was a philosophical crisis. If a fox can perform humanity so convincingly that no one can tell the difference, then what is humanity? Is it something you are or something you do? Is it an essence or a performance? And if it is a performance, if being human is just a matter of saying the right words, making the right gestures, following the right rituals, then how do you know that the person sitting beside you is truly human and not simply very good at pretending? In China, this anxiety expressed itself as a fear of political corruption. The Huli Jing in the imperial court was a metaphor for the scheming concubine, the manipulative eunuch, the false advisor who wore the mask of loyalty while serving only themselves. Chinese fox stories are, at their core, stories about the fragility of institutions, about how easily the machinery of civilization can be hijacked by someone who understands its levers. In Japan, the anxiety took a gentler, more personal form. The Kitsune wife story, of which Kuzunoha is the most famous example, but far from the only one, is a meditation on the limits of intimacy. Can you ever truly know another person? Can you ever be sure that the face they show you is their real face? The Japanese answer is tinged with mono, no aware. The acceptance that you cannot, that all intimacy is partial, that every person you love is, in some sense, a fox wearing a human mask, and that this is not a reason to stop loving. It is simply the nature of love. And in Korea, where Confucianism was embraced with a fervor that exceeded even China's, where social roles were so rigid that a person's clothing, hairpin, and manner of bowing could reveal their exact position in the hierarchy. The fox myth became something else entirely. It became a story about the prison of identity. The Gumiho cannot change what she is. She can change how she looks. She can change how she speaks, how she moves, how she loves. She can study humanity for 1,000 years and replicate it flawless precision. But at the end of those 1,000 years, when the moonlight hits her at the wrong angle and her shadow disappears and her eyes glow amber in the dark, she is still a fox. The boundary between what she is and what she wants to be is absolute, uncrossable, merciless. This resonated in Joseon Korea because Joseon society was built on exactly such boundaries. A slave could not become a nobleman. A woman could not become a scholar. A butcher's son could not become a government official. The Gumiho examination theoretically allowed for social mobility, but in practice, the barriers of class, gender, and birth were nearly impenetrable. The Gumiho, in this context, was not just a monster story. She was a mirror, reflecting back the experience of every person in Joseon society who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they could never become what they wanted to be, that their identity was fixed at birth, that no amount of effort, talent, or desire could change the fundamental fact of what they were. The fox wants to be human. The slave wants to be free. The woman wants to be heard. The commoner wants to be seen. The answer in Joseon was almost always the same. You cannot. You were not born for that. Go back to the mountain. Go back to the kitchen. Go back to the field. Know your place. Is it any wonder, then, that Korea's fox is the saddest of the three? There is one more layer to this, and it is the most subtle. In Chinese fox mythology, the fox's desire for power is presented as evil, a corruption that must be rooted out and destroyed. In Japanese fox mythology, the fox's desire for love is presented as natural, bittersweet, perhaps, but not wrong. But in Korean fox mythology, the Gumiho's desire to become human is presented as neither fully evil nor fully sympathetic. It exists in a gray space, a moral fog, where the listener is never quite sure how to feel. Is the Gumiho a villain? She kills. She consumes. She destroys the men who trust her. Is the Gumiho a victim? She did not choose to be a fox. She did not choose to be hungry. She did not choose to live 1,000 years in the gap between what she is and what she wants. The Korean storytelling tradition does not resolve this ambiguity. It leaves it open, like a wound that refuses to close. And this refusal to provide a clean moral answer, this insistence that the world is complicated, that monsters can be sympathetic, that victims can be dangerous, is one of the most distinctive qualities of Korean narrative art. You can see it in modern Korean cinema, in Korean literature, in the moral complexity of K-dramas that refuse to divide their characters neatly into heroes and villains. It began, perhaps, with the Gumiho, with a fox on a mountain, carrying a marble of light in her mouth, looking down at a world that would never accept her, and choosing again and again, century after century, to try anyway. The living echo the foxes never died. They simply changed shape again. In the 21st century, the Gumiho, the Kitsune, and the Huli Jing have undergone transformations as dramatic as any in their 1,000-year histories. They have migrated from campfire stories and handwritten manuscripts into screens, television screens, computer screens, phone screens. And in the process, they have reached audiences that their original storytellers could never have imagined. Let us begin with Korea, because it is Korea that has done the most radical thing with its fox. Korea made the Gumiho lovable. In 2010, a television drama called My Girlfriend is a Gumiho aired on Korean television. The premise would have horrified a Joseon-era storyteller. A nine-tailed fox, played by the actress Shin Min-ae, is accidentally released from a centuries-old painting by a hapless young man, but instead of devouring him, she follows him around like a curious, endearing, slightly feral puppy. She eats beef obsessively. She does not understand modern technology. She is powerful and dangerous, yes, but she is also innocent, funny, and achingly lonely. The drama was a massive hit, and it redefined the Gumiho for an entire generation of Korean viewers, transforming her from a figure of horror into a figure of romantic comedy. This was not a betrayal of the myth. It was an evolution, and a surprisingly faithful one. Because the core of the Gumiho legend was always loneliness, was always the desire to connect, was always the yearning for a humanity that remained just out of reach. My Girlfriend is a Gumiho simply asked, what if the man didn't run? What if he stayed? And what if staying was enough? A decade later, in 2020, Tale of the Nine-Tailed pushed the evolution further. This time, the Gumiho was male, played by the actor Lee Dong-wook, a departure from centuries of tradition that cast the fox as exclusively female. This male Gumiho was a former mountain god who had fallen from grace, living in modern Seoul, working as a kind of supernatural problem solver, while searching for the reincarnation of a woman he had loved centuries ago. The drama was darker, more complex, and more explicitly rooted in Korean shamanic mythology than any Gumiho adaptation before it. It treated the old legends with respect, weaving in references to the Yowu-gyuseol, to mountain spirits, to the Gyeosung Saja, and to the ancient tension between the human world and the spirit world. And then there is the most globally recognized Korean fox of all, though most people who know her do not know her Korean origins. Her name is Ari. She is a character in League of Legends, one of the most popular video games in the world, played by tens of millions of people across every continent. Ari is a nine-tailed fox who can take human form, beautiful, dangerous, and haunted by the memories of the humans she has consumed. Her in-game abilities include a charm that draws enemies toward her against their will, and an orb of spiritual energy that she throws and recalls. A clear reference to the Yowu-gyuseol, the fox marble of Korean legend. Ari was created by Riot Games, an American company, but she was explicitly designed to be Korean. Her visual design draws from hanbok aesthetics. Her backstory echoes the classic Gumiho narrative of a creature torn between her predatory nature and her desire for genuine human connection. She is, for millions of gamers around the world, their first encounter with the Gumiho, and most of them have no idea they are engaging with a myth that is over 1,000 years old. Now, let us cross to Japan. The Kitsune's modern life is, if anything, even more ubiquitous than the Gumiho's, because Japan's entertainment industry has been exporting fox imagery for decades. The Kitsune appears in so many anime, manga, and video games that cataloging them all would take hours. But a few landmarks stand out. Naruto, one of the best-selling manga series of all time, centers on a boy who carries a nine-tailed fox spirit sealed inside his body the Kyuubi, a creature of immense destructive power that the protagonist must learn to control and eventually befriend. The Kyuubi is drawn directly from Japanese fox mythology, and the series' central theme, the struggle between the human and the monstrous within a single being, echoes the oldest Kitsune legends in the Studio Ghibli universe. The animated films of Hayao Miyazaki and his colleagues that have become global cultural treasures. Fox spirits appear in various forms, always tinged with the melancholy that characterizes Japanese fox lore. The tanuki of Palm Poko are shape-shifting tricksters facing extinction in the face of urban development. And though they are raccoon dogs rather than foxes, they carry the same emotional DNA, the grief of magical beings in a world that no longer has room for magic. And in the world of video games, the Japanese fox has become an aesthetic unto itself. Akami, a beloved action-adventure game, stars Amaterasu, the sun goddess of Shinto mythology, who takes the form of a white wolf. But Kitsune appear throughout the game as allies, enemies, and enigmas. Genshin Impact, the globally popular open-world game developed by the Chinese company MiHoYo, features Yi Miko, a character explicitly modeled on the Japanese Kitsune tradition. A shrine maiden with fox ears, a playful demeanor, and centuries of hidden wisdom. And China's Huli Jing has had perhaps the most dramatic modern transformation of all. In 2008, the Chinese film Painted Skin, loosely based on a story from Pu Songling's 17th century collection, Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio, brought the Huli Jing back to mainstream Chinese cinema. The film depicts a fox spirit who wears a human skin, literally a painted skin that she must periodically remove and repaint to maintain her beautiful appearance. She falls in love with a human general, and the film becomes a triangle between the general, his human wife, and the fox who would do anything to take the wife's place. The film was a massive success, grossing over $100 million in China alone, and it sparked a renewed interest in Chinese fox mythology that continues to this day. The sequel, Painted Skin, The Resurrection, went even further, exploring the Huli Jing's willingness to trade her immortality for a human life. a plot point that, interestingly, brings the Chinese fox closer to the Korean Gumiho's yearning than any previous Chinese fox story had done. More recently, Chinese animation has embraced the fox spirit with enthusiasm. Fox Spirit Matchmaker, a hugely popular Chinese anime series, reimagines Huli Jing as supernatural matchmakers who help reincarnated lovers find each other across lifetimes. It is romantic, comedic, and surprisingly emotional, and it represents a sea change in how Chinese culture portrays the fox. No longer simply a destroyer of dynasties, the Chinese fox has become, in the hands of 21st century storytellers, a figure of romance and redemption. What is remarkable about all of this, the Korean dramas, the Japanese anime, the Chinese films, is how the core emotional DNA of each country's fox has survived the transition into modern media. Korean Gumiho stories, even in their most light-hearted modern incarnations, still carry an undertone of sadness. Ari is haunted by guilt. The Gumiho in My Girlfriend is a Gumiho fears abandonment. Lee Dong-wook's male Gumiho in Tale of the Nine-Tailed is driven by a centuries-old grief. The Korean fox, even when she is funny, even when she is lovable, even when she is the protagonist rather than the villain, still carries that stone of Han inside her chest. Japanese Kitsune stories, even in their most action-packed modern forms, still carry an undertone of impermanence. The Kyuubi in Naruto is eventually befriended, but the friendship is shadowed by the knowledge that the fox's power is borrowed, temporary, and dangerous. Kusunoha's story echoes in every Japanese fox tale where love is real but cannot last. The Japanese fox, even when she is powerful, even when she is divine, still disappears at the end. Chinese Huli Jing stories, even in their most romantic modern versions, still carry an undertone of ambition. Painted Skin's fox does not simply want love. She wants to replace the wife, to take her position, her identity, her life. Fox Spirit Matchmakers' foxes are charming, but they operate systems of power and influence that span centuries. The Chinese fox, even when she is sympathetic, even when she is the heroine, still wants to be in charge. 1,000 years of storytelling, and the foxes have not changed. Not really. They have only learned to wear new masks. The real world, if you go to South Korea today, not to Seoul, not to the neon bright streets of Gangnam or Hongdae, but to the countryside, to the small villages nestled in the valleys between mountains. And if you ask an elderly woman about the Gumiho, something interesting will happen. She will not laugh. She will not dismiss it as a fairy tale. She will lower her voice just slightly, and she will tell you about a time or a place or a person. And the story she tells will not have the polished structure of a legend. It will have the rough, uneven texture of a memory. In the province of Gyeongsang, there is a mountain called Jumasan, Gold Crow Mountain, where locals have reported seeing foxes with unusual behavior for as long as anyone can remember. Not nine-tailed foxes, of course. Ordinary foxes. Red foxes, the kind that were once common throughout the Korean peninsula before the Japanese colonial government's extermination campaigns of the early 20th century nearly wiped them out. But the foxes on Jumasan, the locals say, behave differently. They do not run from humans. They sit at the edges of clearings and watch. They appear at twilight, always at twilight, and they are always alone. There is no scientific explanation for this, and none is needed. What matters is not whether the foxes of Jumasan are supernatural. What matters is that the people who live near that mountain believe they might be, and that this belief shapes how they move through the world. They do not hike that mountain after dark. They do not speak disrespectfully of foxes. They leave small offerings at certain stones, a bowl of rice, a cup of water, not because they are superstitious, but because, as one elderly farmer told a folklorist in 2003, it costs nothing to be polite, and you never know, you never know. This phrase, or its Korean equivalent, Ka matunen hinus, Ka gaya hinus, is the unofficial motto of Korean folk belief. It does not assert the existence of the supernatural. It does not deny it. It simply acknowledges that the world is larger than what can be measured, and that humility in the face of that largeness is the beginning of wisdom. In Japan, the fox's presence in the real world is far more visible, literally carved in stone. The Fushimi Inari Taisha shrine in Kyoto, which we visited earlier in this story, is the head shrine of a network of over 30,000 Inari shrines spread across Japan. Every one of these shrines features fox statues, Kitsune guardians, carved in stone or cast in bronze, their expressions ranging from serene to fierce, their tails curling behind them in elegant spirals. Visitors to these shrines leave offerings not to the foxes directly, but to Inari, the deity the foxes serve. And the most common offering is a burage, fried tofu, which is traditionally said to be the Kitsune's favorite food. This is not an ancient relic. This is a living practice. In 2024, Fushimi Inari Taisha was one of the most visited sites in all of Japan, drawing millions of tourists and pilgrims each year. Business people visit to pray for commercial success. Students visit to pray for exam results. Farmers visit to pray for good harvests. And at each visit, they pass between the fox statues, acknowledging, consciously or not, that in Japan, the boundary between the human world and the fox's world has never fully closed. There is also a phenomenon in Japan known as kitsunetsuki, fox possession. Until well into the 20th century, certain families in rural Japan were believed to be fox-zoning families, clans that had entered into a pact with a fox spirit, gaining wealth and influence in exchange for serving as the fox's host. These families were simultaneously envied and shunned. Their prosperity was attributed to supernatural assistance, and anyone who married into a fox-zoning family was said to risk possession themselves. Cases of kitsunetsuki, individuals believed to be possessed by a fox spirit, were documented by Japanese physicians and psychiatrists well into the Meiji period and beyond. The symptoms described are strikingly consistent. The affected person would speak in a voice not their own, display knowledge they should not possess, crave a burage obsessively, and exhibit behavior that alternated between seductive charm and violent rage. Modern psychology would likely classify these cases as dissociative disorders or culturally specific expressions of psychosis. But for the people who experienced them, and for the communities that witnessed them, the fox was not a metaphor, it was a diagnosis. And in China, The Huli Jing lives on in a tradition that is both ancient and surprisingly current. The fox fairy temples, scattered across northern China, particularly in the provinces of Hebei, Shandong, and Liaoning. There are small, often unofficial shrines dedicated to fox spirits. These are not grand temples like the Inari shrines of Japan. They are modest affairs, sometimes just a shelf in a corner of a house, sometimes a small stone structure at the edge of a field, sometimes a hidden room in the back of a shop. Incense is burned. Offerings are made fruit, wine, and sometimes small mirrors, which are said to please the fox by allowing her to admire her own reflection. The people who maintain these shrines do not consider themselves superstitious. Many are educated, urban, modern. They maintain the shrines because, as they will tell you if you ask respectfully, the fox fairy has been good to their family. She has brought prosperity, or health, or luck in business. She is not a goddess. She is not a demon. She is something in between, a neighbor, almost, who happens to live in a different dimension and who responds well to politeness and poorly to disrespect. This practice, quiet, personal, neither fully religious nor fully secular, has survived the Cultural Revolution, survived modernization, survived the Communist Party's official atheism. It persists because it meets a need that no political system has been able to eliminate. The human need to believe that the world contains more than what is visible, that behind the surface of ordinary life, there are other lives being lived, older, stranger, more powerful, and that these lives occasionally intersect with our own in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled, only acknowledged and respected. 3 countries, 3 foxes, 3 ways of keeping the myth alive in the real world. Korea keeps its fox in whispers, in the stories grandmothers tell, in the unease that lingers near certain mountains, in the collective memory of a creature that science has almost erased, but culture refuses to forget. Japan keeps its fox in stone, in the 30,000 shrines, in the fried tofu offerings, in the cultural infrastructure of a nation that has made room for the supernatural within the architecture of daily life. China keeps its fox in secret, in the hidden shrines, in the private rituals, in the quiet, stubborn persistence of a belief that official ideology has tried and failed to extinguish, and all three countries keep their fox in the same final place, in the dark. In the stories told at night, in the space between waking and sleeping, in the moment when the rational mind loosens its grip and the older mind, the mind that still remembers what it was like to sit around a fire in a world full of things that had no names, rises to the surface and listens. Return to Korea, let us go back to the mountain. It is night again. It is always night in these stories, and the mountain is the same one where we began. Yohusan, Fox Mountain. The trees are old. The path is narrow. The air smells of pine and cold water, and something else, something faintly sweet, like wildflowers that have no business blooming in this season. But the story is different now. It is not 1742. It is much later or much earlier. Time moves strangely on this mountain. It always has. There is a woman sitting by a stream. She is not young. Her hair, which was once impossibly black, is now streaked with gray, not the gray of human aging, but a silver white that catches the moonlight and seems to glow. Her hanbok is worn. Her hands, resting in her lap, are thin and delicate, and they tremble slightly, not with cold, but with something that looks, from a distance, like exhaustion. She has been sitting here for a very long time. Around her, the forest is quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a forest at night. Not the quiet of sleeping birds and hidden insects, but a deeper quiet. A held breath quiet, the kind of quiet that gathers around something ancient, something that the forest itself recognizes and defers to. 9 tails lie spread on the moss behind her, and they are not what they once were. They were silver once, luminous, each one thick and soft and alive with a light that came from within, like candles burning inside silk lanterns. Now they are thin, faded. The light in them is dim, flickering, like a candle that has been burning for too long and is almost out of wax. 999 years. She has been alive for 999 years, and she has 1 year left. 1 year to complete the transformation. 1 year to find the 100th liver, to swallow the last piece of human essence, to close the circle that she began almost a millennium ago on this very mountain But she is not hunting tonight. She is remembering. She remembers the first one, a woodcutter, young and kind, who shared his lunch with a fox he found by the road. He did not know what she was. He simply saw a hungry animal and offered it rice. She followed him for 3 days before she took his form in her mind, learned the shape of kindness, the weight of generosity, the way a human hand opens when it gives something away. She let him go. She was not ready, not then. She was only 100 years old, and she still had the fox's patience. She remembers a poet in the Goryeo dynasty who wrote verses about a woman he saw by a waterfall. A woman whose beauty, he said, was not of this world. He did not know how literally true that was. She kept one of his poems. She can still recite it, though the paper crumbled to dust centuries ago. The words live in her body now, carried in a part of herself that she cannot name, not her brain, not her heart, but some other organ, one that foxes have and humans do not, an organ for holding things that are too beautiful to forget and too painful to remember. She remembers a child, a girl, 6 or 7 years old, who wandered up the mountain path one summer afternoon, picking wildflowers. The girl was not afraid when she saw the fox sitting in the clearing. She walked right up to it and placed a flower crown on its head and said very seriously, "You are the queen of this mountain, and I am your servant." The fox, she had sat perfectly still while the girl adjusted the crooked crown, and she had felt something move inside her that she did not understand, something warm and formless and terrifying. It was the closest she had ever come to crying, and foxes cannot cry. She remembers all of them, every human she has watched, followed, loved, consumed, every face, every voice, every hand that reached for hers in the dark. 99 livers, and with each one, a life, a complete, irreplaceable human life, absorbed into her body, dissolved into her blood, carried forward through the centuries like sediment in a river. She wonders sometimes if they are still in there, if the woodcutter and the poet and all the others persist somehow, not as ghosts, not as souls, but as traces, impressions, the way a hand pressed into wet clay leaves its shape, even after the hand is gone. She wonders if, when she finally becomes human, if she becomes human, she will carry all of them inside her. A woman made of 99 men's lives, a human being assembled from the pieces of 100 human beings, like a mosaic, like a quilt, like a song composed of 100 different melodies layered on top of one another until they form something new, or perhaps she will carry nothing. Perhaps the transformation will erase everything, the memories, the centuries, the slow accumulation of human fragments, and she will wake up in a human body with a human mind, and no memory of the 1,000 years she spent earning it. She will be born, essentially, as a stranger to herself, a newborn in a woman's body, blinking in the sunlight, knowing nothing. She does not know which possibility frightens her more. The stream beside her murmurs. The moon moves slowly across the sky, painting silver patterns on the water. Somewhere below, in the village at the foot of the mountain, a dog barks once and then is silent. She reaches into the folds of her jiagori and takes out the Yowu Gusul, the fox marble. It is small enough to fit in her palm. It glows with a soft, warm light amber, like the last ember in a dying fire, and it pulses gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Her heartbeat, the only heart she has. She holds it up to the moonlight, and the light passes through it. And for a moment, the marble is the most beautiful thing on the mountain, more beautiful than the stars, more beautiful than the water, more beautiful than the woman holding it, because the marble is honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is, a fox's heart, ancient and tired and still beating, still wanting. After all this time, she thinks about the man from the village below. She has been watching him for weeks. He is not special, not a scholar, not a warrior, not a poet. He is a farmer. He grows barley. He has a kind face and rough hands, and a habit of humming to himself when he thinks no one is listening. He hums off-key, and he does not care. And there is something about this careless, unself-conscious, perfectly human imperfection that makes her chest ache in a way that 999 years of existence have not been able to cure. He could be the 100th. She could go to him tonight. She could sing, and he would hear, and he would climb. They always climb. She could pour him tea and sit with him in the moonlight and listen to him talk about barley and weather and the small, ordinary concerns of a small, ordinary life. She could learn his humming. She could lean close. She could let the hunger take over, the way it has taken over 99 times before, and by morning it would be done. She would be human. But she looks at the marble in her hand, that small, glowing, pulsing thing. Her heart, the only part of her that has never lied, never pretended, never worn a mask. And she wonders, not for the first time, but with a clarity that comes only at the end of very long journeys, whether the thing she has been chasing is real. If she becomes human, she will lose the marble. She knows this. The fox heart cannot survive in a human body. It will dissolve like sugar in water, like mist in morning light, and in its place she will have a human heart, warm, fragile, mortal, a heart that will beat for 60 years, maybe 70, and then stop. A heart that will feel everything a human heart feels: joy, grief, boredom, love. But that will never again glow in the dark, never again pulse with the light of something older than the mountains. Is that a trade worth making? 99 lives for 60 years of humanity. A millennium of wanting for a single lifetime of having. She does not know, and this not knowing, this irreducible, unresolvable uncertainty, is perhaps the truest thing about her. Truer than the stories, truer than the legends, truer than all the versions and variations and retellings that humans have spun around her for 1,000 years. She is a question without an answer, a bridge with no far shore, a song that never quite resolves into a final chord. She closes her hand around the marble. The glow seeps between her fingers, warm and amber and fading. The stream murmurs. The moon drifts. The mountain holds its breath. And the fox sits alone in the dark, as she has always sat, as she will always sit, suspended between two worlds, belonging to neither. The marble pulsing gently against her palm like a second heart, like a promise, like a prayer in a language that no one speaks anymore. Somewhere below, in the village, the farmer is sleeping. He is dreaming of a woman he has never met, a woman with dark hair and dark eyes, and a smile that seems to know how the story ends. In the dream, she is singing, and the song is so beautiful that he does not want to wake up. The mountain is quiet now. The foxes of 3 countries, Korea, Japan, China, have told their stories, and the stories have become part of the silence, settling into the dark like snow falling on still water. The Korean fox is still on her mountain. The Japanese fox is still in her forest. The Chinese fox is still in her palace. They have been there for 1,000 years, and they will be there for 1,000 more, because the questions they carry about identity, about desire, about the terrible distance between what we are and what we want to be, are questions that do not expire. They are as old as the first fire, and as new as the last thought you will have before sleep takes you tonight. Close your eyes now. Let the foxes rest. And if you dream tonight of a mountain path and a stream and a woman sitting alone in the moonlight, do not be afraid. She has been waiting a very long time, and she only wants to tell you a story.